There are 7 soundtracks in id Software's Doom franchise, kind of, and today we're going to be ranking all of them from worst to best from S to F. So without wasting any more of your time, let's get straight into the ranking. Kicking off this list, we have the Doom 1 OST, and spoiler alert, it's one of the greatest soundtracks in the series. Composed by Bobby Prince, featuring 23 tracks, the Doom OST perfectly establishes the foundations of what the Doom identity really is. Prince understood that the music was just as important as the gameplay or the world, which is ultimately why every ounce of this OST is iconic and memorable. There's a reason most of the tracks in this OST have over 1 million views on YouTube, because they all hold up incredibly well today and pave the way for some of the greatest music ever composed. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to put Doom 1 in Ultimate. Coming up next, we have Doom 2, and I'm going to drop a little bit of a hot take here because I personally don't really enjoy the Doom 2 OST. Bobby Prince this time around wanted to go for something more ambient and mellow, which is ultimately what led to many of the tracks sounding like this. If you ask me, far too many of these tracks are really missing what made the first OST so special. There's nowhere near as many memorable songs as there were in the first game, which is something that seriously stuck out to me during my playthrough. Don't get me wrong, I do think this OST is great and really captures the essence of what makes Doom 2 beloved for so many. However, this just isn't my jam, man. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to put Doom 2 in Epic. Coming up next, we have Doom 64, and I'm going to be completely honest, this might be the only entry on this list that I genuinely think is terrible. A quick look at the Doom 64 playlist on YouTube should tell you everything you need to know, because this soundtrack is kind of trash. If you ask me, the main problem with this soundtrack is that it doesn't really try, because so many of these tracks don't have any recognizable motifs or really any identity at all. The entire soundtrack feels like ambience, and don't get me wrong, I love my sweet succulent ambience and my Doom soundtrack, but you have to try a little harder than this. Unfortunately, after Doom 2, Bobby Prince would move on from this series, which would leave us in a very dark period of lackluster soundtracks. Anyways, before I get completely off track, I'm going to put Doom 64's OST in trash. Coming up next, we have Doom 3. And Doom 3 has always been one of those games I both really respect and dislike, which is pretty much exactly how I feel about this soundtrack. Because of the more horror aesthetic and atmosphere Doom 3 embraces, the soundtrack has to accompany that tone. And to give the OST some credit, I do think it perfectly captures the general atmosphere of what Doom 3 is going for. However, my main issue with this entire game is that it just doesn't really feel like a Doom game. So much of this soundtrack is missing that visceral nature of getting you hyped in the midst of the chaos and action, instead opting for an unsettling ambience which just isn't what I'm looking for in a series like this. If you enjoyed this soundtrack, I can absolutely see where you're coming from, however, it just wasn't for me. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to put Doom 3's OST in mid. Ladies and gentlemen, we finally arrived at perfection, because Doom 2016's OST is the absolute definition of peak. This soundtrack was entirely composed by Mick Gordon, who is quite possibly one of the greatest composers of our time, and crafted an OST which is both a masterpiece in capturing the raw spectacle of Doom's gameplay, while also perfectly immersing us in some of the most haunting environments the game has to offer. Mick Gordon, the Chad King legend that he is, quite literally invented an entire new subgenre of metal music called Argent Metal, just for this game, and you can feel every ounce of passion, soul and purpose shine through it. Mick Gordon was also a fan of the Doom series and paid homage to several iconic Doom songs from 1 and 2 when composing this soundtrack. There are so many iconic tracks in this game, I honestly have no idea where to begin. Every single track in this game slaps, and perfectly captures the moment-to-moment chaos of Doom 2016. This is some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my entire life, which is exactly why Doom 2016 is going to go in Ultimate. Coming up next, we have Doom Eternal soundtrack. And fun fact about me, this is still to this day my favourite soundtrack ever composed. Because if you ask me, this is when the music really became just as memorable and recognisable as the Slayer or the Brand of Doom. Doom Eternal's music is just as iconic as the lightsabers are to Star Wars or the Avengers are to the MCU. It truly is one of the most flawless works of art I've ever listened to, and for good reason. Because Mick Gordon approached this game with more of a vision and identity for what he wanted this soundtrack to communicate. He wanted it to be grander in scope, more epic in spectacle, and really capture the desperate nature of this world and the dire consequences of the events occurring within it. Every single track in this game tells a story and perfectly communicates every single moment of the experience beautifully. Tracks such as Exultia and Sentinel Prime capture the desperation and tragedy of a war which has consumed their cities for centuries. While levels such as Super Gorness, Marscore or Cultist Base instead give us the most badass Doom music we could ever listen to. Fun fact, he even used real human bones to compose my favourite track Exultia by using a femur which was constructed into a flute. This soundtrack easily deserves the utmost highest respects, which is exactly why it's going to go in the Ultimate tier. Now, coming up next, we have the Ancient Gods DLCs. And to be completely honest, these OSTs really surprised me. Unfortunately, after Mick Gordon's mistreatment, he parted ways with id Software, paving the way for David Levy and Andrew Holshot to take up the mantle. And despite this not being as good as Doom Eternal soundtrack, I still think they came pretty darn close. This OST is filled with the same passion and energy Mick Gordon brought to the game, with plenty of their own original content to make these DLCs sound like something that could stand on their own, instead of copying the greatness that came before. For the sake of your time, I'm not going to rank both DLCs individually, as they're pretty much the same and I have college studies to be getting to. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to rank the Ancient Gods OSTs in amazing. Moving on to the final soundtrack on this list, we have the Doom the Dark Ages OST. And to be perfectly honest, this OST really disappointed me. Straight away, what became immediately noticeable was the lack of any significant identity here. None of the previous composers reprised their roles with id Software, instead hiring Finishing Move Inc. to produce the entire OST. And despite them doing a pretty good job, I still think this soundtrack really is missing missing that identity which made the previous 3 soundtracks so memorable. Hardly any themes or music for this game would be considered amazing just because of how stale and directionless it is. Most of the tracks in this game seem to just be generic metal music which rarely ever deviates or progresses into something truly memorable. I'd actually argue the only truly great piece of music here is the main theme, which is kind of disappointing because we really started to treat the music as something that should be prioritized. However, in Dark Ages, it's frustratingly sidelined. Many people used to joke saying the Doom games were like full albums with a game attached to the package, which is both sad and disappointing because no one is really gonna play this game for the music. Don't get me wrong, I truly do love Doom the Dark Ages, but the soundtrack was a major letdown, which is exactly why it's going to go in disappointing. Please don't forget to like, hype, and subscribe the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Seriously, don't forget to hype the video, that's really important guys, please, I'm begging you. Take care guys.